Howdy folks, Rudros here and welcome to another Lorcana Wednesday. Today we are going to be looking at the top decks from the Bochum Challenge in Germany this past weekend. Now this is on the site Ink Decks and it is a work in progress as it says right here. So unfortunately the 8 decks I'm going to show you, I'm just going to take the top 8 that are listed here. I don't think these are technically the decks that were in the top 8 if these listings are anything to be believed. I know we saw the match on stream, so I do know this is first and second, and I'm pretty sure Justin Morales was in the top 4. I don't know about this Emerald Steel discard deck if this was the top 4, so I'm just going to grab the first 8 here. It is what it is. We have to work with what we have, and we just don't have the total decks here yet, but it's still, these decks obviously at least made the top cut, so they'll be worth talking about. And real quick, wanted to go over the overall breakdown for this, and here's the information we have, that out of a total of nearly 2,000, 25% of it was Ruby Amethyst, which is no surprise given how strong that deck has not only always been, but has really adapted well to this new meta. Next we had 22% was Emerald Steel discard. Then we had Ruby Sapphire as the next most represented at 15%, followed by Sapphire Steel at 13%. And the next after that was Steel Song. This is the biggest drop off right here. So these 4 were clearly the most represented, which I'd said in my set championship too, is these 4 I think everyone had kind of anticipated and known about. And then after that, it was really just, well, what's your flavor of it? I think Amethyst Emerald happens to be one of the better ones personally, but it also has a terrible matchup into discard. Steel Amethyst is quite good as well, and I think Steel Song always has a chance, and I mentioned what I assume this is a Mufasa list on the outside edge. And then you've got a few rogue decks too here. This is likely aggro, I would imagine. Probably this one too. But so for the most part, most people were bringing one of these 4 decks. Not hard to see why. It's a very static meta. I think it's also very coin flippy that certain decks beat up on others. So let's jump into some of the individual ones. We'll start, of course, with the winning list we have here. Our winning list was Ruby Amethyst, which is no surprise. Again, this deck has been dominant forever, and it has adjusted very well to the late game power of something like Ruby Sapphire. Now, I think this deck is heavily favored into it. At the start of the set, before people had adjusted to the Flynn Sisu strategy, the Ruby Sapphire was so strong because this deck just doesn't have a way to deal with items, so they would get to dime rather quickly, and then just they would get there faster than you could. Well, this deck certainly sped up so much, so look at this. This is only running 4 1-drops. I mean, you really don't even need 1-drops like you used to, because you're no longer reliant on the snake is what I want to see turn 2. If you don't know, the plan for this is now you get Flynn Rider on turn 2, Sisu on turn 3, Castle on turn 4. If you can see that line and you don't have to change your game plan to adjust anything, you make your opponent respond to you. And a deck like Ruby Sapphire, especially if they're going second against this and you put out Flynn on turn 2, there's nothing they can put out unless they happen to be running the Red Queen, the small one, which most of them aren't. Flynn is going to get you 3 lore. And then you put out the Sisu, so now they're forced to brawl it on the next turn, which they don't want to be wasting their time on brawl. Brawl is such a funny ability because it's really bad for its cost to removal ratio, but all these decks are running 4 of because you just have to have it to take out these must-answer threats like Flynn Rider, like Diablo, arguably kind of like Flaversham. So yeah, we're not even don't even need the 1-drops anymore, so you can happily skip your 1-drop turn. The only thing that's kept me from cutting these completely is I do appreciate them against the Amethyst Emerald matchup. If they put out a Curse Merfolk turn 1, it is nice to have something that can run into it, so they can't just sit there and get lore forever. Flynn's obviously a must. Snake's a must. Brawl is very much a necessary evil right now. It's very good against this deck, again, against Flaversham in particular, is that you cut them off from their card draw, and you have so much more card draw that's just tied to itself. Friends, Maleficent, Castle, Rabbit, these cards all just draw cards on their own, whereas Flaversham has to see this engine with himself and the popsicles. Friends, of course, still, it's just until they power creep this card, I can't see it going away or they ban it. It's usually the only 2 reasons a card disappears. Fox, of course, the entire Merlin Mim package. Yeah, this is standard stuff. For Maleficent, so we are heavy on the card draw. This one has disappeared from some lists. I do like seeing it here. I think it's just, again, card draw is good, and especially if you're going against Bucky Discard, which is your worst matchup, you really only want to play cards that replace themselves. So against that matchup, what's kind of thought of as the common strategy to beat it is that you can't actually afford to put out the Flynn the Sisu. Flynn will just get blasted by a Storm Rage on, and if you just dump your hand like that, you'll have no way to recover. So the idea is you just hold back and you only put out cards that replace themselves. So like Rabbit, like Maleficent, and Castles, of course, your big secret weapon there. Interesting, we're running 2 of the Peter Pan. I wonder why he likes this over the Peter Pan Shadow. I kind of like Shadow a little better just because it quests for 2 lore, but I would guess that this is in here just for taking out a Diablo, so that if they have Diablo, it's exerted, you don't have Brawl, you can just play Peter Pan Shadow, immediately rush in and kill it. Normal Peter Pan. I like the Shadow too because the Shadow lets the Fox hit evasives, whereas there's nothing in here that has evasive, right? That it would naturally give rush to. Yeah, so it really just works for itself, but if the whole point is it's just there to answer a Diablo, it makes sense because it's 1 cheaper then. So Sisu, obviously very good. This card's really probably overstated. It probably should have just had 0 attack, but whatever. So huge part of this package. And B King Undisputed is another reason that this deck is so good against Ruby Sapphire, that late in the game, unless they have an absurd amount of ink, usually they're only putting out, like if they put out a big card like Tamatoa or the Dragon, very rarely are they able to put out another character on top of that. And B King Undisputed just cleans that up so easily, especially that it can be sung by the Goat or the Rabbit is just huge. It's so strong. Yeah, this particular list isn't even running Tremaine. Just says, nope, going in on this. Castle is an absolute terror in the metagame right now because even a card like Maui, he cannot answer it in 1 shot. So I would highly recommend, if you're facing a bunch of castles, that you tech in something that can handle these castles. I personally like Maui's Fishhook still. I know some people think that's too slow and expensive. You could do Vitalisphere. That's a lot cheaper, and it gives you just that extra +2. The only thing I don't like about the Vitalisphere is that if you need to do it on turn 5, you can't play Maui and pay for the Vitalisphere. And then a Vitalisphere plus Fox isn't enough. Interesting, this list isn't running the Crab. That was kind of the old way to deal with it, is you could, if you had a Goat on the field, Crab, give it +3. Now the Goat can one-shot the castle. Now the Mim can one-shot the castle. But no, we've cut that completely for just more removal. So 3 Medusa, no Tremaine. Felt like you didn't need it with the B King. And 4 Be Prepared. I would maybe like to see 1 Tremaine in here, but let's see what our uninkable count is at. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, +4, 9, +7. So 16, a little high on the uninkables, but getting a lot of use out of it. Yeah, I wonder how necessary this Peter Pan is. I mean, obviously it can run right into an opposing castle, so if you like Peter Pan on 1 turn and then Maui on the next turn, you can take a castle out that way, but I would assume it's in here mainly just as a way to deal with Diablo. I'd be curious to know how much this card came up throughout the tournament. So obviously, game-winning list. I think I really do like the shy away from 1-drops. I wonder if there's a world where you cut them completely. Again, you cut off any early attack versus any aggro, and maybe more importantly, you guarantee, I guess the risk of it is if you have 0 1-drops, literally your only turn 2 play is a Flynn. You cannot snake any longer. Maybe that's too risky, but I would be curious to know if there's a world where it's worth it to just not have any 1-drops at all, and you just see how that works. All right, and this is the list it paired against. This one is on the 2 Tremaine. Let's see, it looks like most of this is pretty similar also on this. Yeah, as far as I can tell, he's not on the Peter Pan, and he's on 2 Tremaine instead. So he does have the same total number of uninkables, but obviously has more top-end removal versus more low-end removal. Yeah, I like Tremaine a lot, so I actually tend to favor this just a hair more, as I'm just not over the moon about that Peter Pan, but clearly the other one did what it needed to do. But other than that, I mean, these are basically the same list. And yeah, so similar thoughts. Let's move on to the next one. Next, we have Steel Sapphire by Justin Morales. Got to see this one in a few matches. This is really interesting. He has a lot of different cards in here, a bit of a hodgepodge of things. He has running 2 Scuttle, and I counted up, there is a total of between 4, 4, 4, and then 2 Lucky Dime. So there's 14 items, which is pretty low. I don't think I would run this card, as I just whiff with it all the time, so I haven't personally had good luck with it, but if you can get the Scuttle to hit, I understand why you would like it quite a bit. What's interesting, too, is he's running the 3 Mickey. He isn't running 1 jump ahead. In Ruby Sapphire, I feel like 1 jump ahead is pretty much mandatory because it's the best thing you can be doing on turn 2. However, this the steel color lets you do other things on turn 2. You can do Baboom, you can do Smee, you can do the Scuttle. So I'm much more okay not running 1 jump in this list just because, again, you have so much more you can do on turn 2, whereas red-blue, I feel like 1 jump's probably the best thing you can be doing. And the Mickey is nice, too. Again, if they have an early Curse Merfolk, it's a body on the board. You can deal damage, too. But I do think pulling ink from the top of the deck is very important into the discard matchup. Granted, this is also the best deck against discard, right? It has the most ways to deal with it. You can ramp up. You can get to your Tinkerbell, your Grab Your Sword, and suddenly those Buckies are just toast, which is awesome. Running both Fire the Cannon and Baboom, I understand that. Sometimes Fire the Cannon, you just need that absolute turn 1. Nope, I'm going to kill that. Even if they just put down a Diablo, like the 1 Diablo that scouts your hand, it's a very good argument for just hitting it with Fire the Cannon. Now you know they can't shift it on the next turn. You cut off that Bucky shift line. Let's see how many uninkables we're at. So we have 2 plus 3 is 5, plus 1, 6, plus 4, 10, plus 3, 13, plus another 2, 15, plus 2, 17. So a little high, although this deck can deal with it pretty well. It has things like Fishbone Quill. It has Whole New World to refill the hand. Flaversham, I think, is even better in here than he is in red-blue because Fortisphere is just popsicle second time. So I love seeing all this. Mr. Smee is just a fantastic card to put on early pressure. Don't even bother with Captain Hook at this point. I'm really happy to see Rise of the Titans in here, and it came in clutch a couple times on stream because you have to be able to answer some locations. You have to be able to answer Queen's Castle. You don't have Rush in here. So without this, your best character for hitting it is what? Tinkerbell? Your strongest attack power is 4. I mean, technically Tamatoa 5, but you don't ever want to be attacking with Tamatoa. I guess Beast if he happens to get injured, but or that a single Along Came Zeus. I love this card so much, so I wouldn't mind to see this in here a little more, but I do like the Smash too. It's a way to deal with early Diablo, Ursula Double Singer, and it's inkable, so unlike the Zeus, you can just tuck into the inkwell. I love also both the Bell and the Ariel, so he's only running 3 Tamatoa, which normally I'd be like, that card's so good, you won 4, but with Bell, with Ariel, you have other ways to get that insane lore bump off the Lucky Dime, so I think that works out perfectly well. If you have Lucky Dime down, it doesn't matter if Belle dies on the next turn as long as you just got 5 lore off of her, so I like that a lot. I'm very happy with the Rise of the Titans. All this looks good. I'll touch on Whole New World in a second. Yeah, Beast just for the mirror, and it's a 5 cost. 5 cost being able to sing Whole New World, Let It Go, Grab Your Sword. Those are all huge. I'm happy to see the Let It Go too. It's like, pick one, right? You pick that or Hades, but this is it doesn't have a body, but at least it's inkable, and I think that's huge because this deck does struggle against Ruby Sapphire. If they have an opposing Tamatoa, you have to get rid of that. You can't let that card stick around, and Zeus isn't going to deal with that on its own, so unless you want to waste like Zeus and a Smash, and again, we're not running a ton of Zeus, it's nice to have really good spot removal here. Tinkerbell, of course, great way to deal with opposing Buckies, and just a good challenge card in general. And Ariel's quite good and very annoying to deal with unless they have Be Prepared, or she's alone and then they have the Be King Undisputed. I like this list a lot. I know there was some videos, like Alphos put one out talking about Whole New World and, is it worth it to have it or not? I do still really like Whole New World. Yes, it's kind of dead in the what's it called? Like the red-blue matchup. Every time I've seen someone use Whole New World against me and I'm on red-blue, I'm like, oh my goodness, thank you. I'll take a fresh new hand. So there are times it can backfire. However, I think it really helps against discard, and I've seen these matches where the discard still goes off. You couldn't get to your Tinkerbell, your Grab Your Sword. They have you at no cards in hand, and you just, top deck Whole New World. Problem solved. Now I have a full hand again. For that alone, I think it's absolutely worth it. So I am still a big fan of this card. I think it's still super strong, and I just think you need to be mindful about it and smart about it. Yes, there are times it's not worth it to use it because you don't want to refill their hand. But there are also times you just don't see Flaversham. And even in this deck with all the items you can break, and you need a big hand, and you're also not going to win drawing 1 card a turn and having to play it. So I'm a big fan of this. I like this list a lot. Cogsworth is obviously great in the mirror. he becomes the Cogsworth War, which is huge. Against anything steel, Cogsworth is amazing. Only thing he really falters against is Ruby. So, yeah, I think this list looks really good. Only thing I can think of is maybe find a spot for at least one more Along Came Zeus. I don't know, maybe cut one, fire the cannons, because I just think this card's really good, and it does help you hit locations, but overall I think this looks really solid. Next, our first Emerald Steel discard. I've noticed that several of these lists have cut the Pegasus and aren't in on the big Floodborn Pegasus nor the little one, and they seem to have had very good success with it. I think Pegasus is quite good in something like Green Purple where it's trying to go fast, but this list isn't necessarily trying to go fast, and I do understand the idea of like it's junking up your 1-drops, right? So, you know, Diablo, Robin Hood, you can shift both of those. Well, if you're including Pegasus, that's another thing you can shift, whereas this kind of cleans it out a little bit. Interesting to see the 1-drop Flynn. I don't know. Like, so if you go Flynn on 1, Bucky on 2, it does give you more options for turn 3. Now you can shift this big Flynn in. My only issue is when you shift him in that early, he tends to not... Like, they still tend to have a rather large hand, so a lot of times he can't even start questing for lore, but he is a 4-cost, so he can start singing, so he can sing any of the songs you have in this other than Bruno. That itself is pretty solid. I don't personally like this one, but obviously this did well, so I don't think it's one of those card decisions. I don't think it's wrong. Like, I don't think you're incorrect to put Flynn in here. It's just not what I would personally pick. Diablo Cove are obviously standard. Robin Hood for the shift. Yep. 1 Baboom. Obviously, you got to have your Buckies. He is in on the Ursula package, too. I've seen some people cut her as they feel like it requires a lot of slots. I don't know. Like, I think you naturally want to be having a bunch of Storm Rage on, Strength of a Raging Fire anyway. Those are pretty much some of the best removal effects you can have. So, and I like her as an alternative threat to Diablo because, you know, people are teched against Diablo. Your Diablo is probably going to die the turn it comes down. So I like having both Diablo and Ursula. It says, all right, well, you can only pick one of them. You know, if you go first and you get the Diablo, Bucky Shift Diablo line, they go to 2 ink. And now on next turn, they're going to go to 3 ink. So they're going to brawl you. They're going to Storm Rage on you, whatever. And then you put out this Ursula. It says, okay, well, here's this second threat. You know, pick one. Do you want me to start double singing Sudden Chill, double singing Storm, or do you want to let me draw a card? So I think I can put on a ton of pressure that way. Ursula's are great. I've really come to detest this Aladdin because he breaks all my items. Only 1 Zeus, but I kind of get it in this matchup. This matchup's trying to just get ahead. Zeus is good for hitting locations. Robin Hood shifts are obviously good. All these are solid. Yeah, I think this looks really, really clean. I do like it without the Pegasus. Even though, again, he's another card. I don't think he's wrong. I just don't think you even need him. And I think he does kind of make your 1-drop into 5-drop line a little messy. So we have 8, 9, plus 3, 12. Only 12 uninkable. Like, that gives this deck even more consistency, as if this deck needed it. There's only 12 uninkable. That's really nice. Yeah, maybe the only thing I could really think of is I personally probably wouldn't play the 1-drop Flynn. I just don't think he needs to be here. What would you put in its place? That I don't know. Maybe another Baboom if you wanted a little more removal. Keeps your inkable count high. Maybe one more Along Came Zeus. But I think this list looks quite clean. Back to another Ruby Amethyst. This one is more in on the 1-drops. And so, yeah, this is a list I kind of built at one point. And it has 1 less Mim just because which is kind of weird, right? You'd think, well, you can get away with the Mims now. But this one is on the 1-drops. These are the 2 1-drops of choice. Essentially, you want 1-drops that replace themselves because of the discard matchup that if you put out a Broom, you have to be able to draw a card off of it. Same with Chernobog. And then everything else here is pretty standard. Flynn, Brawl, Friends, Mim, Maleficent. Only 3 Sisu. So not quite fully in on the combo that there is a chance you could potentially whiff it there, but you also have more on the... I feel like if he's going to have this many 1-drops, maybe you would want a 4th Snake because you have a much better chance of hitting that, especially if you're only on 3 Sisu. I don't hate the 2B King Undisputed. I feel like 2's fine for that. Goat, Rabbit, Castle. Yep. A perfect split of Madame Medusa, Tremaine. Be prepared. Yeah, I think this is fine. Again, I don't know if it's right to go to the 4 1-drops because there are times I miss them. I wonder if you could even split the difference. So this list had 4 only, and then this list has a full 8. So what if you kind of did 6? So 3 of each, 3 Chernobog, 3 Broom, maybe 5, 2 of one, 3 of the other, or maybe 4 in one. I don't know. I kind of like So Chernobog, a deck like this is Cannons is very good against Chernobog, right? They pay 1, you also pay 1, you've killed this thing. Not only do they not get lore from it, they're not going to draw off of it, which is really what they want. Cannons does also kill Broom though too, so that is one instance I do really like Cannons for. That you can just cut off this early card draw of like basically, yeah, you paid 1 for nothing. So that's interesting. Yeah, and that might be an argument. Maybe you do go to 4. I still would love to see a version where you just have no 1-drops, if that works, or if that's just too bricky, because then it's completely flint or bust. But yep, looks like Ruby Amethyst, so solid. Another Steel Sapphire. This one by Pure Tercer. This one is running the hook, which I do just kind of, I don't know, there's something to, like, comforting about the Smee hook package. I just feel like they should be out there together, don't they? And then the Smee obviously not taking damage, which usually doesn't matter. Like, rarely do I see that come up that like, oh, if only that Smee hadn't taken damage. Let's see. Oh wow, okay, so we have 3 hook. We've got the full package. 3 Baboom, a lot higher on this. No Scuttle, and we have the same amount of items. We are also on the Mickey, so this list definitely favors this over the 1-jump. Bell, Flaversham, I'll get to McDuck in a moment. Whole New World, yes, yeah. 1 more Beast. We're actually not running any of the Tragic Beast, so we are completely reliant on the Flaversham engine for our card draw, which it is a lot more consistent in this list versus Red-Blue, so that makes sense to me. That's actually interesting. Makes me kind of wonder if, yeah, how much this Beast is or isn't needed. That's interesting to see. Let It Goes, again, I like. Some stuff you just have to spot remove, grab your sword. All this is pretty standard. So the biggest things that stand out to me about this list over the other one is 2 McDuck Manor and 1 Tamatoa. I have been running McDuck Manor in my red-blue as a kind of a mirror breaker. Beyond that, I tend to just ink it. So I have been questioning lately how good it is or isn't, because I can't even remember the last time I actually put it out. Now, the problem with the red-blue is that you're always on, I feel like you're always on the chase. You are the later deck. You're the setup deck. You are always going to be the one chasing your opponent for lore. Not once have I ever like, oh, I'm ahead in lore early in the game. That's just not how it works. But there are times the McDuck Manor has also saved me that I'll get it down and the opponent either will just not even bother to deal with it because they think, okay, I'm ahead on lore and then I can board wipe them and then it's slowly just getting me up there. So I do like McDuck Manor for that. A lot of opponents don't want to have to stop and deal with it. But I also could understand an argument for cutting it. I don't understand 1 Tamatoa. I realize you have Bell, 2 Bell, 2 Aerial. This list, I think, had 3 Aerial. No, 2 Bell, 2 Aerial, so it's the same. But yeah, I don't know. Tamatoa is so good. And in this list, too, with the Fortisphere, like, you can get so many items. So many. I think you need 2 of this minimum. And honestly, I would even say 3, because I think the card is that important. Because that, yeah, I would 100% maybe cut down. You only really probably need 2 hook. Because, I mean, look at all the 1-drop options you have. Granted, we have no cannons in this list, but I don't know. I think at minimum go to 2 hook and 2 Tamatoa. That's way too low of a number for me. Is favoring the mirror a lot with 2 of these beasts, but I liked a lot. And then that I like as tech. It's really good, make them waste a Tamatoa to get them back. But yeah, that'd be my biggest change. Is I definitely would want to see more. Or even, I like McDuck Manor, but if it's a choice between that and Tamatoa, I'm going Tamatoa. Cut the 2 Manor, get the 2 Tamatoa. Like, granted, I know it dies to the red-purple matchup because they can just use Me King Undisputed, but if anything, that's all the more reason to play multiple copies because you have to expect that your first one is just going to die to red, to Ruby. So, yeah, that would be my big critique for this one. Here we have Emerald Steel by Tim Heinrichsen, King Moby. That's a fun little name. I like that. So the first thing that stands out is the very first card here, which is Cursed Merfolk. Running 2 of those, that gives us 12 cards we can play on turn 1. Merfolk is interesting. You don't see very many of these lists running Merfolk, and it's still just a very good card, right? It is uninkable, but as we saw with those other versions, like, these tend to have a lower uninkable count anyway. I kind of like that. I don't know if that's the right choice or not, but I don't think, unless they're playing specifically steel, it feeds into your discard plan, right? If you put this out turn 1 and then you follow it up with a Bucky and then you just start questing with it, unless, again, they're using Fire the Cannons or a Baboom on it, which if they're blowing removal on a 1-drop, I think you're kind of okay with that. But if they have to attack it, it also just feeds into your discard plan. And if they don't, again, some of the considered strategy for Ruby Amethyst is don't actually play these cards out and just ink and try to ramp up, only put out something that replaces itself. So if you go turn 1 Merfolk and they're not putting out a card till a Maleficent on 3, that's potentially 6 lore you're getting out of this, and then, you know, they get punished for dealing with it. So actually, I kind of like this. That's pretty interesting. I would be curious to know how this helps the deck overall. Maybe gives a little more consistency, maybe not. Other than that, it looks pretty standard. 2 Baboom, your Buckies. We are on the big Ursula as a 3 of. Of course, our Diablos, Aladdins. Let's Stormray John. Strength. Yep. All this looks pretty standard. Yeah, so that's the big change. I would love to know how well this did for him. I mean, obviously this deck made top 16, at least. So, but I wonder how much the Merfolk came up and how effective that was. Because it seems like it would be really effective and it would feed into your plan, other than if you happen to be going directly against a Fire the Cannons. And last, certainly not least, another Ruby Amethyst. This looks pretty similar to our last Ruby Amethyst list. We're on the only 4 1-drops. This is pretty similar to the first one then. And yeah, it's really interesting. They have just cut Crab entirely. I guess they just don't need it anymore. That either, hey, I'm going to go faster, so I don't really care about your castles or anything of yours that I need the Crab to challenge. Or why even bother challenging when I have cards like Tremaine and Medusa that will just get rid of your characters. Really, the best thing for Crab was opposing castles. Because, yeah, I don't think you're overly worried about Tamatoa in this list. You have Be King, you have Tremaine that just, and Be Prepared that just clean them up lickety-split. Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting that Crab just doesn't really seem to have much of a place anymore. So, pretty standard Ruby Amethyst. So, those were the lists I was able to pull. There are some ones further down. I didn't know. I would like to see, can we find a quick red blue not showing up huge, or again, this isn't a full, maybe they did, so just because this is a deck I've been playing so much, I do want to find one. So here we have, this is top 64 Ruby Sapphire by Rice Master. This looks pretty standard. We are running the Vitalosphere, so it does give our Mauis a way to answer the castle. Speaking of answer castle, hello, we got Hercules. Man, I have considered running this card, but I just hate this card. It's such a worse Maui, uninkable, worse stats. Like, it should be a 7-4. If this is a 6-5 and you bump this by 1 and subtract this by 1, this should be a 7-4. Why is this a 7-3? And it's uninkable, but it answers the castle in one fell swoop. Is that enough to make it worth it? I don't personally think so, but clearly this person did. Great Stone Dragon, I've fallen off completely. I just think you would think it would do well against the discard matchup, but the problem is, yes, they make you discard characters, but then Aladdin just comes down and breaks it anyway, so it doesn't do anything. Only on one of the big Sisu. He's on the big 4 top end. Be Prepared. Medusa. Even running 1 Tremaine. I do kind of like this. I wish I had room in mind to find for Tremaine. We are on the full 1 jump How Far I'll Go package, which I think you absolutely have to, because against the discard matchup, you can't use Quill. You have to keep your hand healthy. Tala, Flaversham, kind of all the usual stuff. Yeah, the Hercules, like, I respect him. I respect a deck choice like this, saying, hey, I want to be able to answer that castle. That's what I'm going to do. Again, I think Maui's Fishhook is maybe a better answer, but I understand that card also feels very, very slow the turn it comes out. So I get it. Yeah, interesting. Kind of a shame this deck didn't show up much more in this top cut, but it really does get bullied by Ruby Amethyst right now. And without changing the deck entirely, the flow of it, and cutting off the top end to do more low end stuff to combat Ruby Amethyst, I just don't really know how to change it. So anyway, that's what my little analysis is. Let me know what you thought if you watch Bochum, what you're thinking of. Are you going to Texas? If you are, I will see you there. Feel free to come say hi, say hello. And yeah, should have a nice fun video next week. Tomorrow, Final Fantasy TCG spoiler video. I always put a lot of work into those, even if you don't know FF. It's a fun time releasing those videos. So appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, take care.